Thanks, everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you about something that I'm passionate about, which is information security. Well, there I am. All right. So when does it change on the monitor here? All right, perfect. All right, we're good to go. All right, so obviously, as everybody knows, it's been a pretty big year for information security in the healthcare industry and kind of economy-wide. And unfortunately, it's not always in a good way. So Sashi spoke a little bit before, but healthcare is one of the highest profile targets of malicious cyber attackers. And that's going to be due to the absolute criticality of the data that we process. Now, to protect that data and our systems, we always need to be one step ahead. So to start, let's share some trends that we're observing, that the industry's observing. First, the FBI, a good source for these sorts of things, they monitor a lot. They're noting that the use of generative AI technology, Gen AI technology, we've seen a lot of cool applications for it today, right? But it's important to remember that in cyber attacks, it's also being used by the bad guys and is driving new kinds of adaptive attack techniques, and it allows things like extremely convincing impersonation to create false trust with victims. So it's really something we have to stay on top of. Another trend that we're seeing is everybody's familiar with phishing, and we're going to actually talk a little bit about that. But the defenses against phishing are getting better, thankfully. That's a good thing. But we're seeing a slight shift away from phishing-based attacks to good old vulnerability exploitation attacks. So it's really important to stay up on your patching. Now, that's because of the better phishing defenses, like I mentioned, and more advances in secure authentication mechanisms, which is something I'm really passionate about. I want to talk to you about. Hopefully we have some discussions afterward about. So specific to healthcare, the average cost of a data breach is altogether almost $11 million. There's the recovery cost, and then there's the fines, and then there's the time for your people dealing with it, and that's on average in our industry. And that is the highest of any other industry, straight for the past 13 years, healthcare, the most expensive. So let's kind of reinforce these points. We thought it'd be a good idea with some stories. Walk you through some scenarios that demonstrate some of the most common ways that organizations can fall victims. So you can kind of have your feelers up for these sorts of things and be aware. Now, these stories I'm going to share, they've been, names and places have been changed to protect the innocent or whatever, but, I assure you that all of this has happened to multiple organizations. So let's do a few. All right, so let's say one of your employees receives an email, apparently from a customer. Looks like it's from a customer, somebody that I'm familiar with. The email states that the user has received an encrypted message. And of course, we get these things all the time, right? Something comes in, it says encrypted message, secure message, click here to decrypt. Doesn't look out of the ordinary, and so the user clicks the decrypt button. Well, they go to a web page, and they're taken to that web page and says, okay, enter your email password, please, and then we'll decrypt your message. So they do that. Then they click submit, and the page notifies them that, thank you, your decrypted message is on the way, and it will arrive in your inbox shortly. So they're feeling good, and they're looking for the decrypted message. They're expecting good news from the customer, perhaps, but the message never comes. Why? Well, of course, they just entered their email address into a fake web page and unknowingly disclosed their password to an attacking party. It's that easy to do. And now that the attacking parties obtained that password, they use it to gain access to the company's IT systems and start to move about the network and engage in a ransomware attack. And that's a pretty typical phishing scenario, actually. And it's why, at SDS, we really encourage the use of TLS email encryption, so we can bypass those secure shells because, really, if you get used to those things, they can become a phishing channel, right? So here's another one, the dark web. What does it mean? So if you're not familiar with the dark web is, it's really just the web, right? But it's places where bad guys, cyber criminals, they trade the data that they've stolen. They talk about their techniques, all kinds of things. And so it's really important that we are aware of the dark web. So another scenario that might sound familiar, an employee is setting up an account with, let's call it G Design Site. They don't pay me to come up with, marketing names, so that's the best I can do. Now, this new application, G Design Site, is a new cloud application that they'll be using to help them with graphic design. It's a graphic designer play. And, probably in your organizations, you've got a lot of these cloud applications, right? And you're signing up for them, and, how do you manage the accounts and the credentials and the tracking? And, it just it becomes shadow IT pretty quickly. Well, since the account is related to the job, they register with their company email address. Makes sense, easy to remember, and they're going to be doing any of the email interactions via their company account anyway. But to make things easier for them, they choose a password that actually matches the password that they're using for company IT systems. After all, they've memorized it, and it's related to work, so they're just going to use it because they're going to be logging in and out of it all day, and that's just going to be easier. Well, everything seems to be going fine until a few months later when G Design Site suffers a cyber breach. They're attacked really hard, and a dump of a lot of data goes onto the dark web, and that includes logins and passwords for the site itself. All right? Now, what happens is somebody comes along and they purchase that. They say, this is a lot of really good data. I see a lot of passwords here. I see a lot of email addresses. Let's see what I can do with this. So a hacking group purchases that information, and they notice the employee's company email address is tied to a well-known healthcare company. I didn't tell you that part. They decide to target it for an attack because they know how valuable data is from healthcare companies if they can encrypt and ransom it. So, with this information, a password and a company email address, it's pretty trivial. This hacker group is easily able to gain access to the company's IT systems because the employee set the same passwords for both sites. Now, once on the inside, that hacker group is going to start to move laterally through the network, escalate their privilege, gain administrative access, establish what we call a command and control beacon where they can phone home and execute the attack. And then they start finding the data, encrypting, exfiltrating it, which means just uploading it to their cloud websites and their confidential data. And hopefully we know the rest. They're going to try to ransom that and demand a lot of money. But it happened all because somebody used the same password. All right. Here's another one. I like this one a lot. It's kind of old school, but it still happens. Portable storage. You should probably be controlling the portable storage in the network, but it's sort of a hard thing to do, and they don't make it very easy. So let's imagine an employee is walking to the company parking lot after work one day, and they look over and they notice something sitting on a bench. Okay, it's shiny. So they walk over, they pick it up, and it's a USB flash drive. And on a label, it says something interesting. Executive Salaries 2024. Very interesting. Now, normally, this is a good employee, and they would turn something like this into the finance department, assume something was dropped. But today, they're feeling a little bit disgruntled. Maybe they lost out on a promotion that they really wanted, an opportunity to another colleague, and they're not feeling so generous. So The next day, they walk into work with this thing, and they connect it up to their computer and say, you know what? I'm going to have a look. I'm going to see what's going on here. What's really going on in this company? And so they put that into their drive, and they were going to look at the spreadsheet. Well, as soon as the drive is put in, there's no spreadsheet. A window pops up, flashes on the screen, and disappears, and the employee is left confused, befuddled. Now, there's no spreadsheet on that drive, but there is a script. It's called auto-run. I wonder what that is. All right, so the employee sort of starts to sense that maybe something is a little bit off here, and maybe I just did something that I probably shouldn't have, right? But they don't want to get in trouble, so they just remove the device, throw it away, and hope that nothing happens. They don't notify the IT security team or anything like that. So it's too late, though. Now, maybe if they had notified the security team, they could have gotten on top of it. But that script has installed a backdoor, put in a command and control, and starts to phone home. And from there, the attack begins. They start to move across the network, and the attacker now has full access to the system because a drive was inserted into the computer, and they were just engineered. It's a form of social engineering. It doesn't always happen over email. It doesn't always happen over the phone. They can get you in various ways, so you have to be vigilant. All right, I think one more ransomware. There's a reason why we're sort of repeating this and kind of drilling it in, right? Ransomware, as I mentioned, it wasn't a good year for ransomware. Your company has a website, and it's a website that allows customers to log in and check on the status of their projects and check on the status of their tickets. Popular website among your customers, and it has a particular software stack. Let's just say it's SQL Server and Microsoft IIS, something like that. Well, last month, Microsoft issued a vulnerability alert for the IIS web hosting application. The vulnerability is rated critical. That's the highest rating that we have for software vulnerabilities. As due to the hacker being able to obtain what we call RCE, it stands for remote code execution. Once I exploit the vulnerability in the software, I can execute any code on your system that I want. I just send it, and your computers run it for me. Now, at some point, everybody's aware, but the version of IIS that your company is running is vulnerable, but your IT team's busy, and they're too busy to patch it. They know it's out there, but this is just for our customers. What are the chances? We'll get to it next quarter. We'll patch this thing, and besides, this is a really important website, and we can't really afford to bring it down to patch it. So, we're going to wait a bit on this. We got other better things to do. It's a big mistake because their site is being scanned. Anybody in IT that's stood up services on the internet has seen this effect, where you put up an application on the internet, a web page, something like that. You don't even have to wait 2 minutes before you start seeing the hacking scans come through in your logging. It is constant, right? And that's, it's actually amazing. Now, the hackers, they're scanning this thing almost immediately. And they find that exploit. In fact, they're looking for it, but it's all automated, right? Nobody's sitting behind a keyboard. They've got scripts running 24 hours a day from the cloud in other countries, that are scanning for this vulnerability. And of course, they find it and they exploit it. And they exploit it automatically too, right? It's successful. The hacker achieves the remote code execution. And what do? They use it to download a beacon and now they have a presence on your network. Once that's established, the hacker is going to do what they always do, which is try to move laterally across your network. It means I'm going to discover everything. I'm going to find out what your servers are. I'm going to find out what your workstations are. More importantly, I'm going to find out where your data's at and how valuable that data is. And once I've got the entire landscape of your network, because I'm moving quietly, right? If you don't detect me, I'm moving quietly and I'm discovering these things. I'm going to make a plan. I found the critical data. I found the PHI. I found the PII. Time to start encrypting it and getting it uploaded. That's exfiltration. Now, because of this operation, the system crashes. The site goes down completely because its data is encrypted. Your IT team attempts to restore it from the backups. Meanwhile, they're dealing with all the security items as well, but finds that the attacker has also encrypted the backups. Remember what I said about they move laterally and find the data wherever it is. And if you're keeping your backups online, they're going to find and encrypt that too. And that's to force you to pay their ransom. So the company has no choice at this point. They have to pay the ransom, and it's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. And by the way, you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that that decryption key is going to come. They don't have to. And in fact, as we found out in recent events earlier in this year, sometimes you pay the ransom, sometimes you get the decryption, sometimes you don't, and sometimes they'll continue to blackmail you with this data. And so that's why it's really, really important, and these are just kind of the basics, to stay on top of patching critical vulnerabilities. All right. So moving on to generative AI. We've talked a lot about, we've seen a lot of applications. We're doing a lot of cool things with generative AI. There's a lot of tools. And the question in the back of my mind, and the back question probably in a lot of is, all right, that sounds amazing, but how are we governing this, right? How are we making sure, who am I sending my data to? So a story can be told about that too. There's an employee and they're under a tight deadline to turn around an analysis of a spreadsheet. That deadline's coming up and it's looking like I'm not going to be able to get this done. I'm so busy. That spreadsheet contains confidential information about the company's finances and its customers. That employee decides, you know what? I've heard about ChatGPT. It's doing amazing things. I'm going to call in ChatGPT for some help here. It's going to do the job for me. So they pull up ChatGPT, they register for an account, they get the premium, everything, and they go ahead and say, ChatGPT, here's my spreadsheet. And they upload it, and they enter it into ChatGPT, and they begin to ask their analysis questions. ChatGPT does a great job. Comes back with all the right answers. They come back with a great analysis report, and everything seems fine, right? Well, 6 months later, a user on social media posts some samples of the company's confidential information. They also post and explain how they were able to obtain it simply by asking ChatGPT. Because what does ChatGPT do? It takes information from a lot of sources, the web, what people enter into it, and it's a public service, and putting confidential information is putting that information at risk. So it turns out that that was incorporated, trained into those models and the content, and therefore it ended up being made available to the public. Now, once that information was disclosed, the company's stock started to tumble. Maybe there's just something in there that wasn't so great. But that's how easily it can happen. All right, finally, I want to talk about another vector attack here. It's called business email compromise. This is a term that we use to talk about, it can involve hacking, but it also might just involve simple social engineering. So let's say that your accounts payable department, here, I'll back that up. Your accounts payable department receives an invoice, an email with an invoice from one of the company's suppliers. Looks completely legitimate. It's actually written very well because the person that wrote the email put it through ChatGPT and said, make this sound like a supplier invoice email. And ChatGPT did it. Now, the email mentions that, by the way, we've got a new bank account. So if you wouldn't mind, adjust the routing and adjust the account number and make the payment as soon as you possibly can, please. So the AP staff member goes ahead, updates the banking information, and releases the payment. Everything seems fine, but later that month, another email comes from the supplier. It says, well, we got a past due invoice here. Well, the employee looks at it and says, no, I think I already paid you actually earlier this month, I promise. And in fact, I sent it to your new bank account and everything, so there must be some kind of confusion, some kind of problem. Well, the supplier says, we don't have a new bank account. What are you talking about? All right, now they start to get that heart-sinking, stomach-dropping feeling, okay? Becomes apparent right away that I just sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to fraudsters because I thought that legit they were my suppliers. And they didn't even have to hack me. They didn't even have to ransom me. I just gave them the money because my company doesn't have a financial validation verification procedure, right? I just did something, took an action based off of an email, and it really got us into a lot of trouble. So I mentioned all these stories, they're real stories. I changed the names and everything, but all this stuff happens all the time, and usually the dollar amounts involved are pretty high. So how do we protect ourselves? Now, of course, we need to start with the foundational best practices and minimum requirements of any information security program. So that's going to include things like policy and procedure, the basic technical controls, the employee training, and things like encryption at rest and transport encryption, endpoint device, mobile device management, these kinds of things. And definitely incident response. And we're in the healthcare industry. We recommend adopting the High Trust Security Framework, for which we've been certified since 2019. It's built specifically for the healthcare industry, as you may know. And it does a great job specifying all the appropriate controls and behaviors and policies that the organization needs to have in place. Now, beyond the fundamentals, we got to be proactive, and we got to be multi-layered. We like to call it defense in depth. If any layer of your security should fail, you want to have another in place to prevent intrusion, right? You want to become victim to the Swiss cheese model, right? If the holes of the Swiss cheese slices line up and you go straight through it. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. How many rely on the Microsoft 365 for your phishing and spam protection, right? It's pretty good. You probably do if you're using that service. But how many are only relying on that? Well, we found that putting an additional layer of protection in has been a game changer. So we added that, and we're actually amazed. It was like night and day. When we first turned it on, we were shocked by how much of that malicious stuff, that phishing, that spam, was being passed through by the Microsoft filters, but was being caught by our new supplemental vendor for this, because they really specialized in it. And so that became a second layer of our security. So speaking of AI, we're also going beyond, and we're implementing, we're going beyond traditional endpoint response, and we're doing a more comprehensive extended detection and response. So that's called XDR. It's going to cover the entire infrastructure stack, so not just the endpoints, but the systems that leverage AI, it's going to do your network. It's going to be in your application stack, really everywhere. These systems leverage AI to learn the normal traffic and user activity patterns in your environment, and then it can map the outliers and automatically detect and respond to unusual and dangerous events on the network. So I definitely recommend going beyond traditional endpoint and going to the next generation of technology. Another technology I'm really excited about is passwordless authentication. In fact, I really, really like passwordless authentication. Let's think about what a password is. And most people don't consider it. They're used to passwords, but they don't really understand how broken the whole password system is. A password is a secret that's shared between you and some system or application. And if you know the secret, you're allowed to log in. Well, the problem with passwords is that you have to send it across the network in order to prove that you know the secret. And that's going to make it extremely vulnerable to interception. And that can be via phishing, network traffic sniffing, really anything. Passwords can end up in application logs as well, and those can be stolen. Now, of course, we should configure the factor authentication, that access code that changes over time. That's a separately generated code. And so that's going to be a huge mitigating control, so that even if somebody intercepts your password, they are going to have to go through that second layer. And at SDS internally, we're already enforcing multi-factor authentication for all of our applications. And as you may know, by the end of the year here, we're rolling it out to require it and force it on QuickClaim for literally everybody. And we know that's going to be a change. It's going to be an extra step, and it's not as convenient, but we think it's important to protect the data. But we can move beyond passwords and get rid of them for good. They no longer provide adequate protection, so it's time to replace them with something much better. And that's why we're implementing passwordless authentication to our environment as well. So imagine your device, like your laptop or your phone, acting like a partner to you. It stores complex cryptographic keys, right, those secrets within the hardware components, where it can't be intercepted and it can't be extracted. And then the device actually authenticates you with websites and applications by answering cryptographic mathematical challenges that prove your identity without giving away your secrets. These systems are context aware as well, which means they know whether you're dealing with a legit website or with a fraudulent website. So there's no chance that they can be tricked into giving up the information. The device will simply scan your face or your fingerprint, incorporates biometrics in order to unlock that, and then perform the authentication cryptographic ceremony with the application. So it's highly secure, it's next generation. I promise it's the way that you will log into every single website, every single application in the future. There will be a time when you won't even use a password. And certainly my kids, there will be a time where they just, hey, remember we used to use passwords? That was weird, right? Why would anybody do that? And finally, instead of waiting for attackers to come to you before you detect them, be proactive. Get them first by working with a technology partner that actually can continuously scan the dark web, right? This is sort of the next frontier in taking your security program outside of your walls and taking the fight to them, right? So we can scan the dark web and detect brewing threats against your organization. And this can include identifying, online cybercrime chatter that may be related to you, sites that are being set up to impersonate yours. Those can be found on the internet and then shut down proactively. And it can allow you to stop attacks before they start, because remember that there's activity on the dark web. Before you're involved in a massive attack, there's activity on the dark web that can detect it. So as an AI and automation company, we really get excited about bridging the latest technology and best practices to our security program and bringing them to as we do about bringing them to our products and our customers. To us, it's kind of the same, right? We want to put the AI in, we want to put the best-in-class technology into our products, but we also want to put it into our security program. We're happy to share that passion with you and discuss anytime, so thanks for listening. Q&A. Hopefully I didn't get too geeky or technical with a lot of that stuff, but you know, it's like fun to think about, but kind of not fun too. What are we using to train our employees in security? So we've developed a training program where you know, we have our own materials that we train them with. But we also sponsor things like professional certifications in cybersecurity, right? If anybody in the organization wants to get, you know, there's basic security certifications, you know, like the Security Plus, and then there's more advanced ones for security professionals like the CISSP and the CISM. Then we sponsor that as well. We really encourage that within our organization. There's lots of modules out there as well wherein our employees are required every so often to take training modules. You can find these things at various vendors like KnowBe4 and you know, BrightTalk, places like that. So use all the resources you can. Oh, and one more thing. We also work with another vendor. You got to have security partners, right? And the best in class, you can't do it all alone. One of our security partners actually engages with us for employee training, tabletop exercises for incident response. You know, you really can't do too much of that training and practice when it comes to things. Thanks for the question, Jason.
A lot of this attacks come from like a less sophisticated vendor partner. How do you push security to vendor partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So third-party risk management is a really important part of anybody's security program, and it should be adopted. In the high trust framework, there's a huge focus on it. It's like, you know, one of the largest sections that they have, actually. So, you know, the first thing is you have to make sure that their policies and procedures and controls align with yours. And it has to be up to your standard, too. You know, you can't, if you're going to be, you know, sending data or, you know, engaging for any kind of system access, you know, they can't be a weak point. So you have to make sure of that. So that's where, you know, we've all seen them, a lot of those security questionnaires come in, and those are getting, you know, more common. You can do audits as well, right? We're subject to a lot of actually, you know, let's say cooperative, interactive audits with our customers where they'll come in and we'll talk with them and we'll demonstrate the security controls. That's going to be important as well. And, you know, you have to have an onboarding program and a vetting program. There's cases where you know, a vendor wants to come in, or some department or business wants a vendor to come in, but, you know, they can't pass the minimum requirements. They say, okay, you know, we can't approve the risk of this particular vendor, at least not at this time, or at least not without implementing these additional controls or mitigating factors. And, you know, that's important as well. So, and it can't be after the fact either, right? It has to be before you bring that vendor on board. Your security team, your IT security team, should be absolutely confident and comfortable with that vendor's security environment and approach. Shannon.
I heard you say that you were going to be required an MFA for QuickClaim. Okay. Do you have an ETA of when that might be?
Yeah, and in fact, we wanted to do it already, but it's such a big change that we're really putting it through a lot of testing paces right now. So it'll definitely be before the end of the year. You know, look for it probably around 12/1. Ben.
Has Smart Data Solutions ever had a penetration test, and what does that mean for compliance and security?
See, that's just a, you know, this is my colleague Ben over here. So the answer is yes, right? We do these things continuously, actually. Number one, we do it ourselves internally continuously, right? We're constantly scanning our network. We are constantly engaging with our vendors. But then we do a yearly exercises officially for High Trust, wherein we do external, where they try to make it into our system by using a lot of these methods that we just talked about here, and they'll try to break into our system from the outside. And then we do an internal as well, where it's called an assumed breach penetration test. We will set them up on one of our company laptops, let's say. We'll say, all right, now you've got a beacon, you've got a command and control, what now? And they will execute, and they will try to move laterally across our network. They will try to find our data. And they are also testing our detection systems as well. And in the most recent one, it's actually funny, I had forgotten that this was going on, right? Our security team takes care of it. I knew it was going on, but I didn't know exactly when it was going to start. And I get this alarming email from our security system and vendor saying, there's a computer on your network, it's compromised, I'm shutting it down, like immediately, right? And so it was actually a good test, right? I called up and I said, this is the penetration testers, right? Yes, it is. So, yeah, we do all kinds of that activity. Web application penetration testing as well, wherein they'll log into our web application. And web application security is a whole other discipline. It's a whole other area, right? And we have them try to break our site, try to steal data, try to escalate their privileges within QuickClaim, and then they get back to us with a report of, well, here's what I was able to figure out. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
My question is specific to like generative AI. I know you talked about using ChatGPT and stuff with confidential information can be a huge issue. Are there solutions where employees can use like generative AI tools to build out PowerPoint products, whatever, that kind of skirt the lines outside of the like ChatGPTs and more open source products? Or do those have to be homegrown?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's going to be to your organization's policy, right? Of course, there's so many more tools out there that are beyond ChatGPT. And one of the issues with like large language models is they're really large and they're complex, which means hosting them in-house for a lot of companies isn't really an option, right? Unless you want to just put a ton of hardware into it, a ton of GPU, and a ton of memory, because think about the billions and billions of parameters it takes to host, let's say even Llama 2 from Meta, right? Which is open source. You got to put a lot of resources behind that thing. Well, what we have now is vendors that'll host it for you, right? So you just call into the cloud. And then you'll have others that'll put other services around those, and maybe they have their own models that you're accessing. And of course, that's what a lot of this is based on, right? You have to make sure that your AI and governance policy, first you have to have an AI and data governance policy. You have to say, okay, what are we comfortable with from a risk perspective? What are we not comfortable with from a risk perspective? For example, we're comfortable with our data being used by the vendor in the modeling as long as it doesn't go to anybody else, and as long as they don't keep it for more than 48 hours, and as long as they don't train their models with it. And then we read through their policy, and you sign the contract and you get that commitment and say, okay, this is a vendor that we can use. You may have another vendor where they say, no, we share all your data with so-and-so marketing firm or whatever it is, right? You may go, we can't use this vendor. So make sure to have a policy, and every vendor that you bring in has to meet that AI governance policy that you set out. Final questions? These are great questions. Appreciate them. I love talking about this stuff. All right, if nothing else, I'm going to be around, for the happy hour, the cocktail hour, all that, so come and talk to me. Thanks very much.